And it's specific to forages, our Grasslands Coalition has done a good job of reaching out and trying to help people learn to better manage grasses, to stop plowing up prairie, and to move some of those lands back into grass. And of course, there's some incentive programs out there that are helping with that.
Welcome to the Crop Science Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Arnell. Today, I'm excited to have Sara Bauder with us from SDSU Extension. Sara's been with SDSU Extension since August of 2016, worked primarily as an agronomy field specialist, and now she has the role of Forage Field Specialist. Sara, welcome to the podcast, and love to know a little bit more about how you ended up with doing what you do with the Forage Extension Specialist, some of your ongoing projects.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Podcasts are always fun. It's like the new way to talk to people anymore.
Absolutely.
So it's a good time. So I'm from South Dakota originally, born and raised here, moved a couple times, but still kind of in the southeast, south central part of the state. And I've worked for the university for quite a few years, actually, but for Extension, like you said, since 2016. I started as an agronomist, and interestingly enough, working as an extension agronomist was something I always wanted to do. I had set my sights on it early on, and when I was in school, I knew that was something I was interested in. The SDSU Extension structure changed when I was getting my undergrad, so as a result, I needed a master's degree. So that kind of intrigued me even more, and I went on to get my master's in agronomy and focused initially on research, and then went into extension. And just did general agronomy for a few years, which was great. The fun thing about being a general agronomist is you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's the run of the mill, you get several of the same question, and then the next day you get some crazy thing that nobody seems to know the answer to, and you're seeking out all kinds of crazy resources. So I really enjoyed that work, but found myself focusing more on forages as time went on. We lost our Forage Field Specialist while I was the general agronomist, and I had taken over some of that work I had been helping her with, and started doing more research on alfalfa and work with various forages, and it just kind of led me to this position. We had an opening, and it just was a good fit. So I switched over to forages and now do quite a bit of work with our local and regional forage growers, and I direct our new Forage Association as well. So quite a bit of work to do in the forage world. We don't have anyone else in forages with SDSU Extension, so there's plenty to do, but it's a really fun job.
Explore the future of agriculture with KWS, a global leader in innovation and sustainable farming practices. Uncover the exceptional qualities of our hybrid rye, cultivating a legacy for a greener tomorrow. Visit kws.com/US for more information and for dealer locations. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
You forage folks are few and far between, really, as it comes to especially applied forage. So are you out of Brookings or Mitchell? Where I'm trying to figure out where you're out of. I've seen some different notes.
Yes. So SDSU Extension is housed out of the main campus in Brookings, but I actually work out of a satellite office based out of Mitchell.
Okay. Isn't that the corn capital of...
Yeah, the Corn Palace is pretty exciting stuff. Corn Palace. And the local high school team is the Colonels. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's funny. I only know from a few snow goose outings over the years, making my way up to South Dakota. So
Yep.
So one, I want to say again, thanks for joining us. As there during this recording, there's a little bit of a snowstorm going on up in your way, and so I know you're stuck at home. But Sara, tell us a little bit about some of the work you're doing right now.
Sure. So one of my main objectives at the moment is building a networking group of forage growers, buyers, anyone that has really anything to do with the forage industry or interested in it, because we really haven't had a good connection in this part of the world in a long time with any type of network or organization. There are a few regional ones that reach out, but we're kind of on the fringes of everybody. So in an effort to bring more forage programming to South Dakota and try to get growers, more unified and together, we ended up building a forage organization. So the Northern Plains Forage Association is a new group that's just formed. It's South Dakota based, but really reaches out to, anywhere in the Northern Plains or surrounding states. The board just didn't want to exclude anyone. So it's a grassroots group built from growers and industry professionals putting it together. And, we kind of ran our first year here. We're a little over a year in, ran on a shoestring and a prayer, but we had really good supporters and sponsors, and our board members that are industry reps really helped us out. And now we're gaining membership from both businesses and individuals. And it's been a great way to focus on not only the growers learning from each other, but I can get information from them, which is something that a lot of times in the extension world, we really have a hard time with anymore, right? I don't have to tell you that. So I have great connections with growers from all over because of the group, and it's slowly growing. And the programming that I do with Extension kind of melds well with what they're doing. And so we're able to kind of grow that forage network in this general area.
Well, it's really needed. I know on a regular basis, especially, during drought, it's always during drought. We're having the conversation from the forage producers or the forage buyers. What do we need to do as far as the production? And then the buyers come in. Where do we get it from? Cattle producers. Oklahoma is a fairly cattle dense state. And so every drought there is, we're always looking for buyers. Getting into that, kind of might have questioned more about the region you're in. In our state, with especially with the new climate smart stuff coming out, we're going to expect to see a transition in some of our more marginal ground that was either graze out wheat or maybe marginal into likelihood with this coming year or two seasons, more perennial grasses planted, more forages. Does that transition up into your area, or what does that look like?
So we've had a pretty strong soil health regenerative ag movement going on here for several years. The South Dakota Soil Health Coalition was formed quite a few years ago now, and I have been one of a few extension folks that have tried to partner with them in some of their work. And I'd say because of them and our South Dakota No-Till Association, along with other groups that have come in, of course, USDA, NRCS, and Pheasants Forever, and lots of groups like that have worked together and really combined efforts, and growers have become more aware of resources, programs, and great ways to really utilize their ground, because we're in corn, soybean country, mainly on the eastern side of the state. And like you said, there's opportunities, especially during drought years, or here sometimes during a really wet year too. Yeah. Like people get frustrated and they don't know what to do. And that's when, resources kind of become utilized, right? When you have to. Yep. So I would agree that, yes, that movement is happening here, and it's specific to forages. Our Grasslands Coalition has done a good job of reaching out and trying to help people learn to better manage grasses, to stop plowing up prairie, and to move some of those lands back into grass. And of course, there's some incentive programs out there that are helping with that. But these groups, these grower groups, with our new Forage Association included, have really pushed toward that regenerative, sustainable look and tried to help people work out the economics behind it, because that's a big thing, right? You don't want to dive into something new. Scary enough to try something new, but to not know if you're going to make any money or you're going to lose money. So the connections between the growers and then the groups helping to facilitate that, I think, has really pushed in that direction. And we're also seeing forage growers ask more questions and look more towards alternative forages. We have a Forage Field Day every year. I share it with UNL. So we go back and forth. The Haskell Ag Lab is in northern Nebraska. And then we were in Beersford on the opposite year here in southeast South Dakota. So we go back and forth. And this last year, we partnered with a couple groups to put that on. I-29 Moo is a dairy group, and then the Forage Association, and a couple other universities. So we worked on that all together, brought a bigger audience in, and focused on sorghum. And what was really interesting about that is the growers that came that have never grown sorghum, or it's been years and years and years since they've grown sorghum. And they had so many good questions, and just like the basics behind, how do I grow this crop intentionally? Because around here, especially where we have higher rainfall, people grow sorghum as plan B or C. It's not plan A. So that particular program was really fun because they got to see some of our sorghum research plots and ask a lot of questions. And it was very eye-opening for me as an extension person to see how many people really don't know, the basics behind it, or had some really great questions about that alternative forage and other alternative forages too. We hear a lot about cover crops, but actually planting a forage intentionally is a whole new thing for some people. So, and I'm not putting anyone down. I mean, we farm too, and we don't plant a lot of intentional forages until we really are in a corner and have to think about it. So sometimes just the simple things really count is what we learned from that.
Well, that's fun. In Oklahoma, really, the covers haven't taken off well because it's forage. We have so much cattle, it's immediate. Whenever we looked at bringing a new crop in, like canola, we brought in winter canola 15, 20 years ago. The first question out of the majority of the farmers was, can we graze it? So, our farmers are used to that grain cattle and so really cover crops as a cover crop only didn't last long because immediately they saw green and they saw gain. And so it was, then it was controlling how much we can graze that cover and still have the same benefit.
Yeah. Well, and you have less rainfall there too.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your average rainfall is, but it's got to be
we work between
less.
10 and 50 inches.
So it really varies.
Really, yeah. From corner to corner, 10 to 50.
Okay. Well, ours is pretty variable too. If you say from corner to corner, this part of the state, you're going to see 20 to 25. So there's enough, or sometimes more, sometimes less, of course, but there's enough rainfall that we're just not seeing, typically not seeing a lot of issues with cover crops taking off. Now, there's been several dry years here where we have had problems, but it's a little easier to get adoption when it actually rains.
Yeah. So do you work primarily with introduced species or produced forages, or do you also work with some of the natives and rangeland?
I don't focus as much on the grasses in the range because we have range specialists. And so I wasn't trained, not well anyway, or specifically in range. So I can't say I can speak to a lot of that, but sometimes what we're trying to do works together. If someone's trying to plant a perennial grass stand, but they want a nurse crop or they want to put an annual in first, then they're working with both myself and the range specialist. But I do a lot of work on, like I said, the alternative forages that we don't think about. And then also alfalfa. We're one of the top alfalfa producers in the nation. And we don't spend enough time, I don't think, as a university focusing on alfalfa. It's kind of true, unless you're in maybe Wisconsin or Kentucky or California, there's just not enough time and energy spent on our forage crops. So I do work quite a bit with alfalfa. We have some variety trials. We do commercial variety trials. And then I have some standalone work that I do. The most recent years, I've done seeding rate and inoculum trials. Once we did an AMF mycorrhizal fungi biological study. Those results are coming soon. That was multi-state and should be really interesting. But I also, have research plots on sorghum. We do some winter annual forage plots. We also do some warm season in the summer. So some are grazed, some are harvested. Just depends on the year.
On your sorghums, is it a sorghum Sudan? Is it brown midrib? What are the things that fit well into your environment?
So the sorghum plots that are at the farm right now, and when I say at the farm, I do most of my work at the Southeast Research Farm because it's closest to me, and that's where the forage equipment is of SDSU's. So the sorghum work is recent. As of the last couple of years, we hadn't done sorghum work for a while. So we actually have a commercial variety trial, and we allowed entries of any type. So it was sorghum Sudan grasses, and then there's a couple BMR too, I believe, in there. And it could be a 1 or a 2 cut system. And we've actually offered that in the past with grazing as an option too. That's really hard to do though. So this year we just did some silage option, but, and then I also have I'm a co-PI on a study. Iowa State has a sorghum breeder. She does a great job, and she really focuses on breeding these northern varieties that can survive in our northern climates. And so I'm a co-PI on a project with her where we're trying to find new lines. So it's another variety trial, essentially focusing on similar things. So yeah, we do a little bit of everything. If I had all the time and money, we would do more, but we do what we can.
Well, getting back to the alfalfa and the network. So when you're working with your producers in that network, and if we look at alfalfa as one of your primaries, what are some of the most common questions that you're hearing? What's some of the things that you've seen tend to see as a common occurrence as far as the questions go from your farmers?
That is a fantastic question. And of course, it depends on the time of year.
Of course.
But like this last year, for example, once one blister beetle is spotted in the state, it's like chaos ensues.
Mm-hmm.
So insect issues, but specific to anything toxic like blister beetles, are a big one. And then helping people, it seems like the main question we get aside from that is helping people identify why their alfalfa looks like it does, what that symptom is. Is it an insect? Is it a disease?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so variable on the year, what insect issues we might have here, or just a plant disease. If we have a really thick stand and it's irrigated, we have some very large producing irrigation fed farms in this area that grow alfalfa. And once in a while you see some disease issues there. So I would say the pests are probably the biggest thing, insect and disease. But aside from that, occasionally I'll get like a feeding question to the point of, I found this in my hay. Is it safe? Or what species are in this hay? That's a hard one. Like, can we send this to a lab for species testing? No, not really, but you can send me a picture. Yeah, please don't. So, it's very dependent upon the year. I'd say the other question I get is what variety should I plant, which is super dependent on what you want to do with it, surprisingly to a lot of people.
So what's the common stand life for your area? If you're looking at the average, there's always extremes on both ends, but what's average and how do they follow out? What's some of the crop rotation they use in the region if they're in a long-term alfalfa stand?
That is a great question. Dairy farmers will go 3-ish years, in a lot of cases, those high producing. Some are less, some might go a year more, but typically not more than 4 in most of those situations. And a lot of them are looking for feed. So they try to rotate out to corn silage. Now there's a few that are very resilient, soil resiliency minded, and they might rotate out for a couple of years to something other than corn silage, just trying to get another cool season crop in the rotation. But typically you're going to see corn silage and alfalfa. There's a few that will rent out maybe for a year to get something else on there. And then if you're looking at a beef producer who raises their own alfalfa, a lot of times the stands are they're let sit a little longer. I'd say the average stand, to get the great plant health out of it is 3 to 4 years, but people will go 5. If they have good rainfall, they'll let it go longer. I know out west, I've done some alfalfa surveys and I've been in grass alfalfa stands that people say they don't know how old they are. They've been there.
Oh yeah. I have too.
It's like, well, that's fun. I wonder how old this plant is when it was all started. But, you go further west and you could see 20-year stands. It's not that strange. 10 to 20-year stands. In this part of the country, 4, 5, 6, maybe.
Is that a winter kill issue? Is it survivability? Because I'm thinking in Oklahoma, we're probably 6 to 8 years is probably a fairly, on somebody maintaining and really looking into that. 6 to 8 is not uncommon. So what's about your read? Why is it a shorter term?
A lot of it's winter kill. If you're comparing to further south, we've got winter kill issues. The irrigated farms can probably go a little longer than some of the others, but the other part is just most of it's dry land. So you have the variability of stand health and stand vigor. But the December ice rain type things that happen really do us in on winter kill a lot of times, or just having an open winter with no snow. Occasionally that happens, and then it's way too cold for too long. So I'd say that's probably the biggest factor. Of course, pests can come into play too, to be an issue. And the other thing is management. We'll have people that just cut too late, but it's before it's dormant, but too soon, before it's going to become dormant. And then they're just cutting off their stand health. So there's some of that too.
So I was in Winnipeg in December, and they were fairly open up there. Are you guys open? I mean, I know it's snowing now, but were you open up until this, or?
There was some snow on the ground where I live, but there's been parts of the state that were pretty wide open. Yeah. So, but on the other hand, it hasn't been super cold. We've had a pretty mild winter. So we'll see what happens now that it's actually snowing in a large portion of the eastern part of the state. Hopefully that'll cover some things up, give them a little insulation.
So could you say on average, you see on average about 25 to 30% of the alfalfa acres replanted each year, or how does that break out as far, I guess you do, is it 1 year out then back in, or is it 2 years out and back in?
That really depends on the producer. A lot of times when someone calls me and asks, it's typically if they have a stand fail that they planted and they want to replant. But occasionally someone will say, how long can I wait before I put this alfalfa back in? And if it's a really old stand, you might be able to get away with planting it back a little sooner. But, if it's still thick and healthy, I usually tell people to be super safe to wait a couple years if they can. Now, one year is great compared to just a few months. Yeah. But the allelopathy issue can be a big one. And if you look at the research, I summarized some allelopathy research a while back and did a short article on it. And it's like, it could be 1 year, it could be 6 years. So it's extremely variable, and there hasn't been work done on it in this area, which doesn't necessarily mean anything in this area recently, I should say. It doesn't mean a whole lot, but when you're talking to a producer, that does mean something to people. It has to apply to their area. For those that aren't used to alfalfa, and I was kind of going that direction with the allelopathy because I want to see what you had to say. So share a little bit with the listeners, those that aren't used to the issue with the allelopathy and why we're most have to rotate out 1, 2, or some cases even more years than that. Sure. So in layman's terms, allelopathy is basically a biological issue where alfalfa exudates a chemical that will not allow itself to grow there again as a new seed. So there is a much more appropriate scientific explanation of that. But essentially, you don't want to plant alfalfa and then plant it again right away because you're going to have serious issues with either it won't come up or it'll come up and damp off or have very poor stand. Typically, when it really comes into play is when someone plants a stand and it fails on them and they want to replant. And a lot of the research from Nebraska, Bruce Anderson was a alfalfa researcher extension agronomist in Nebraska, and he's retired now. But a lot of his work will tell you 13 months. That's the closest to here that we have research for. So if I plant a stand this coming spring, it fails on me, and I plant again within the 13-month window, I should be okay. But if I let it go too far and that stand takes off, then it's probably exudated too much. Basically, the plants have released too much, and we're going to have some allelopathic effect from that. And then you want to interseed something different or put a different crop in for a year. So, because I'm down south. So, do those exudates break down while the soil's frozen, or does it only breaking down during non-frozen time? Honestly, it's a good question. I don't know a solid answer to that. I wonder if the answer of that 13 months would be different in Southern research. I can't say I've looked that far into it, but it would make sense because it's kind of a chemical biological combination reaction that it probably slowed down when it's very cold. That would be logical to me, which would mean it would take longer. Well, I hadn't thought about it much, but even in our Oklahoma and our Southern research, the allelopathy and the wait time, as far as the peer review publications, they're not consistent. I mean, even for us, they're like, wait a year or 3. Yeah, exactly. At so least I'm not. That's a great question. I've never looked that far into it. Never talked to somebody far enough south where it would matter, probably. But I don't know. It's a really. I'm good at throwing problems out and very. That's okay. Now I'm going to have to go look. I'm going to have to research that one a little bit. But I'm sure it does have something to do with soil temperature because the biology would slow down. Yeah. So you mentioned seeding rate, and that's an intriguing one to me in your research. And of course, alfalfa is not the cheapest seed that you can purchase and plant. So talk a little bit about the cost and why seeding rate is probably valuable in knowing that, and some of your work in seeding, because you did say seeding rate and inoculum work, right? Yeah. So I'm actually just working on summarizing some of that data to try to get all 3 years put together. But essentially, because the cost of seed is so variable, I mean, we're talking several dollars difference between planting just a common vernal type variety to a Roundup Ready alfalfa variety. And those rates can really, I don't even want to throw anything out there because the range is huge. But if you're looking at seed from a single dealer, you're going to see a big difference between a common and a bred variety and looking at a variety that's Roundup Ready or has some type of gene in it. For a chemical. So we did some seeding rate work, and essentially we went from 5, which is really low, like 5 pounds, to I think the top was 25 or 30. I believe we went to 30. So we did intervals just to see a curve there.
Yeah.
And I'm working on summarizing all 3 years right now. But essentially what we're seeing is that like 10 to 13 range is really all you need. And I can't say I haven't summarized it across the board yet. And this is, of course, just at one site. But we did the same thing. A friend of mine at UNL that works for Extension there, Ben Beckman, he did the same thing at Haskell Ag Lab in Concord, Nebraska. And so we're going to be able to compare both sites and see. But Marisol Berti at NDSU did this work a couple years ago. And I believe they come up with 11 kilograms per hectare, which is not far off as their ideal seeding rate. So essentially what it means is that we have a lot of producers overplanting alfalfa because I think the mentality is, well, I only plant it once every so many years and I don't want to plant it again because it's so fickle to plant. And I'm probably in a lot of cases, renting a Brilliant seeder to do it or a no-till drill to do it. And so they just want to make sure they do it right. And I tell people that if you're not going to take a lot of time to do it really well and calibrate and go slow, then you better add more seed because you're gonna.
So did you see any excessive competition or anything on the high end, that 30 pound? Because 30 pounds that's a fair amount of seed to be dropping. So was there anything did it ever drop off, or was it more of a plateau off when
it's
look up that rate?
It's more of a plateau. Now I don't have the third year summarized, so this will be interesting because we finally. Couple of the years were pretty dry in the study. One did drop off a little, but it's more of a consistent plateau. And I think if it was irrigated, it might look different because it's a dryland study. But in this case, it self-thins essentially. So, and even the 5 pound plots were fun to watch because they start to thicken themselves up. And compensate. So it was really interesting to compare it to the variety trial too and see how different varieties do different things. But we added inoculant on top of that and didn't see a whole huge difference with the inoculant versus not, but that can be very site dependent. But the seeding rate's been really interesting. So I'm excited to get the data put together. But I think in a nutshell, what it's going to say is in that 10 to 15 range is what you need, and you really don't need any more than that.
Yep. I could see that. And I also see if somebody gets cheap seed to throw in an extra 5 pounds just for good, safe measures and all that Roundup Ready, they might flirt with a little bit of the lower end of that.
It kind of depends on your weed situation because, alfalfa will take out thistles and things after a couple of years on its own. But if you got a really bad spot, you don't want to deal with it. That first year is really when that Roundup Ready seed counts.
Yep, absolutely. Well, any other work you want to, share with the group that you're doing?
I think that's the bulk of it. Some research work. We do some programming work. I actually co-host a webinar with Ben Beckman from UNL, and we talk forages. So that's called the Forage Connection. Little play on the Muppets there.
Yeah. I got it.
So we do that once a month. That's been fun, and are always looking for good conversations there.
How do people find that? Is it forageconnection.com or?
If you just search Forage Connection on any basic podcasting platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, it should show up on most any of your typical podcasts. You can also find it on the UNL website too. But yeah, that's been really fun to do. And then working on the research and working with the Forage Association and doing extension events. Those are kind of the main things that keep my time pretty full.
Yeah. That and kids, because we're already talking about the snowstorm and the little ones at home. And luckily I'm in the office today.
It's time for our famous 3.
So as we wrap up here, our three go-to questions. As an extension specialist, do you have a go-to resource when it comes to forages?
Honestly, I use a lot of different resources. One of my go-tos is my list of growers, because a lot of times if I can't find an answer, I know a grower that's tried it. And I would say the other one, I really like to reach out to University of Wisconsin in Minnesota when I can. I used to reach out to Nebraska, but we've lost a lot of the folks there. So just coworkers and colleagues, honestly, are the biggest thing, because the forage world just doesn't have a main hub. We have some great national and regional organizations, but there isn't like a gigantic hub of information somewhere. You kind of have to piece it together.
Yep. Well, so when you have free time, what do you like to do in your free time?
Well, that's a good question. Chase my kids, mainly.
Yeah.
I like to ride horses. Spend my fair time on the back of a horse, either ranching or just for fun.
Okay.
That's probably one of my hobbies that I don't get to do very much anymore, but it's a lot of fun.
So if people want to know more about your extension program and your research, where can they go to find more about your work?
Extension.sdstate.edu is the SDSU Extension website, and you can search forages and get quite a bit of information there. The other place you can look is, if you just, honestly, the easiest way to find it is to Google Southeast South Dakota Research Farm Annual Report. And essentially, most of the forage research that I've done on the eastern part of the state can be found in those annual reports. There's also some research done on the western part of the state that's typically found on the Extension website.
Well, fantastic. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today. And listeners, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you like what you see and you've heard today, share that as we're trying to build our audience up. And of course, leave us comments if you have suggestions for guests that we can bring on the Crop Science podcast. And again, Sara, thank you so much for taking your time this afternoon to visit with us. And I look forward to visiting with you more in the future.
Thanks.